Thanks for being here. Okay, should I wait for Teresa?
No, and she's already started.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, well, welcome to the first policy committee for 2023. And I want to welcome back on the policy committee Member Sanholm and Member Sadowski, and I'm glad that we are on this policy journey together again this year, and I think we're on a roll, and we'll hopefully continue. So a couple things for this meeting is we do not have any policies for the first reading, but we do have 2 policies for the second reading. And policy 408, subpoena of a school district employee, and policy 410, family and medical leave policy, to replace policy 411. And I just am going to ask HR Director Severance if there's any additions on either of these or any changes that you want to share with us.
There is a change to the 410 family medical leave policy. And we talked briefly about it last time, and after conversation with the instructional union especially, we have suggested that we take out the special rules for instructional employees. That's not how we currently operate, and in further discussion, we don't think it's necessary for us to have special rules specific to teachers coming back. We would welcome them back when they can, and if we can make a transition, we'll work to do that. So that whole section you'll see in the attached copy of board book has been redlined out.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there are no other changes.
Okay. And anything in the policy 408, the subpoena of the school district employee?
No, that remains the same, and it is the same as MSBA put forward.
And it's a new policy again.
It is a new policy.
And just, I just want to reiterate too, the family medical leave policy, nothing has changed in the kind of state statute with that policy. So it's more the language.
So HR Director Severance, then could you just review and summarize them maybe for all of us, the rules that instructional employees would operate under?
They would operate under the same FMLA policy practices that we do for any employees, as once they have the doctor's return to work or whatever return to work, because not all FMLA is medical specific. But we would then bring them back to, and if we have an opportunity to overlap so that they have a transition back, depending on how long they've been out, we would work with the principal and find out what's the best for them to come back, but we would return them to work when they're able to return. With the proper documentation, which is what current practice is as well.
Any other questions on either of those policies?
No, my biggest question was about the things that were cut out, so, of the family and medical leave, so, no longer a question.
Very good. Thank you for following up in between with some of the questions we had after our first review and providing this ahead of time too. Yeah. Great. Okay, then the next, there's no regulations, and then the next item we wanted to just spend a little time, and again, we weren't also sure, if there would be some new members to this committee either, but mapping out policy reviews for our calendar for the year. And Patty provided us with a couple things in your red packet. One is the form that we looked at in June as we kind of reviewed the year of policy policies we had adopted from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. And then she updated it from, with the second handout on the policies we've adopted since July 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. And so I think a couple things we want to think about. One is, again, in our proposed 3-year work plan, we're looking at reviewing a fourth of our policy manuals review. And then we also talked about reviewing maybe in blocks, the different blocks of the policies at one time. And so that's, I think, part of the discussion now is kind of moving forward how we're going to approach that. So Assistant Superintendent, did you have some comments? Or Superintendent?
I have a few thoughts. I was wondering, some sections are far broader than others. I mean, if we look at the 100 or 200 series compared to the 500 series, for example, the 500 series has many policies. I was thinking a little bit about, I know we talked about like maybe every other month we would review a section. Wondering if maybe spending maybe a couple month segment on looking at the student policies starting now, and because we're looking at a gender inclusion policy starting in February. So maybe if starting next month we start tackling the 500 series. There's also the 5,000 series, which is the 1,000 series for students. So that maybe if we kind of take some bites out of that elephant and spend a couple months, that would also make sure that we're ready when our student and family handbooks come out in the summer, so that we have our student family handbooks laid out. Just I know that's only talking about a couple of months, but in looking at how many policies, I could see at least 2, if not 3, if not more months. So if we spent February, March, April, maybe May, and completely reviewing those 500 series and 5,000 series, that might be something to consider. But wondering about thoughts.
We have kind of 9 different sections in our series, and so when we think about those
some of them are pretty meaty as well. Like when you think about student interaction with law enforcement, or we fairly recently did our Title IX pieces, but there's non-discrimination, hazing we went through recently, but there are a few in there that I think could warrant a moderate amount of conversation, and have those I wouldn't say processed from a get it done standpoint, but if we spend some time dedicating ourselves to those policies, it would put us in a good place for the summer handbook work.
yeah, so there's 36 policies in the 500 series, or 37, and
Looks like about 50 or more in the 5,000.
But we've already addressed
Right.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so we're not counting 7.
Right.
That's the approach.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to, remember saying how we should.
Well, I was 36, but then in the last 2 years, we've addressed 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
Went from here, so I mean,
Okay.
it's 20,
Yeah.
29,
Yeah.
30 to go. I mean, that, what's the goal to tackle? How many?
Right.
I mean, if we're just going to go into that 500, is it 500/5,000 series? Because we also got to renumber these two.
So basically, we get rid of the 5,000s and they become 500s. That would give us, I mean, there's I think it was Mark Twain said, eat a bullfrog first thing in the morning and everything else will be easy. In some ways, this is like it is taking on that harder task from the get-go. But it would, I think we would be in a very good place if we could address these, but I'm also fine if we wanted to take on a different approach. I just thought that might be something.
So what was your, can you just restate for us then, what's your recommendation?
I was thinking that if we in this, just how do we want to function as a committee? So if we were to address the 500 series, because with the gender inclusion policy we have coming forward in February is a 500 policy, and then we could start chunking out, yeah, exactly, chunking out and taking care of the other 500 policies over the course of the next 3 or 4 months. That would give us a solid handle on that section of the policy work, and it would be kind of completed. Because
How often is it something more urgent comes up that needs to get addressed? You've been doing this longer than I have, so I mean, is there something, things, whether they come down from MSBA or
Yeah,
that we have to deal with because
Yeah.
it's a new model policy or whatever?
most of the time when that will happen will be in August, after the legislative session, and when there might be state statute changes or, changes because legislatively. And then what happens is our association and other associations too, but they will do the homework, so to speak, to provide a model policy for us. And then we usually get that in early August, and they're either, recommended changes or required changes. So that's kind of where we would see a lot of that is August and September. Yeah.
So if we had a legislative change on family medical leave, which is a possibility, we would have to go back and then revisit this.
Yeah. And yeah, we would. And but we've also then done a lot of the homework because of passing it now. I also looked at the other summary of policies from 2021, and we also had passed, there were 2 more in that series. We had done student surveys and we had done the foreign exchange policy. So we've actually done 9 in the 500 series.
So as I'm looking at the what's required in the 500 series, the timeline could work in terms of, because there's definitely policies that are in here that would potentially have impact on the student handbook, which we have to adopt anyway, right, annually. So we would definitely be striving to make sure that we are addressing the policies we need to that are in alignment with our handbook. So I guess what I would offer is that I would like to review these with my team, TLE team, to make sure that capacity-wise, that okay, which ones do we know for sure? Which ones are connected directly with any modifications, updates for the handbook. That would be our first priority. The other pieces, there might be some in here that are pretty easy because maybe they're requiring, again, very minor changes or few changes at all. Those would be easy to bring. And I guess I would just offer, if there are policies here that are really, really more in depth, that there might be time needed to address them. For example, 533 wellness. Well, it's easy policy. However, there's a lot of work that's required in terms of committees needing to meet, which have not had a chance to meet. So to commit to having that policy done in the next couple of months or 3 months would even be a stretch for me at this point in time. So there will be some that I'm like, okay, if we can acknowledge those, but I can strive to, again, prioritize the ones that are connected to our student handbook, and then the ones that we know which require very little work, but then there might be a couple that may require a bit more time, and so I guess I would ask some grace on those.
Yeah. Do you, when would you want us to, what month to adopt the handbook? Is it June or July?
We usually do it right before the beginning of school. No, we actually try to send out the handbook.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wanna say July, but,
July, yeah, somewhere around July.
okay.
Patty, refresh my memory, because that's when we start sending out. Because we start sending out things to families and they have to be adopted, so then it's printed and then.
Yeah.
July was when we did it, July 21st, we did it last year in 2020.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
So I think we were feeling like that was a little late. That was in 2020 when we first came on. Remember?
Yeah, it may have been late, but it's,
Yeah.
as long
July,
as the
usually.
goal is to make sure we have it ready for in families' hands, for the print shop and in families' hands for the beginning of the year so they can sign off because there's a requirement. So we will strive for it. And we'll still, I think July still will be doable, or even sooner, but I'm being, we have a lot going on and I always want to acknowledge the fact that I don't want to overcommit, but the handbook is going to get done. Obviously, like always, we're going to make sure we modify the policies that must get done and adopted. But there's going to be a couple in there that's going to take some time.
And some we might do, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I really like the idea of doing these policies in preparation for the handbook. And you kind of answered my question, because with the amount of policies that are in the 500 and then the 5,000, I was just kind of thinking about staff time and things like that. So I appreciate you kind of going into depth a little bit more about that. And I like the idea of prioritizing the handbook policies and then, maybe there's some minor ones. And like Superintendent Mega said too, this will be a huge thing to get off of our plate and get done, combining them. So I'm in support of that as far as a strategy moving forward.
And some may not require significant change too. I mean, a lot of them have been done within the past few years and some of them might not need any change. We might just look at it and say, looks good.
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 that were done in 2020, so, that's fairly soon. Do all of you have the list of the different names of the policies?
I have it up.
Okay, I could read through it quick if you wanted.
Have it up on the screen.
I have it up on the
Okay.
screen too.
But I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of that section, particularly as it relates to overlapping work with the handbook anyways. I would support that. Anything you would add to that, Paul?
So would we target specifically, at least first, the policies that appear in the handbook? Because they all don't appear in here, but I just got done reviewing the fact that a number of them are in there.
Yeah, many of them are there, so yes, the answer is yes. And more specifically, ones that may impact, as you see in there, anything related to consequences. So we'll make sure that we address any of those things if it's a bullying policy or smoking, all of those kind of policies. If there are going to be modifications to those things, we're going to prioritize those things first.
But there are policies in the handbook that aren't 500 or 5,000 series. So do we want to look at those in addition to, so is the strategy to get the 500, 5,000 series and then get them out for the 500 series, renumbered properly, whatever. And maybe focus that, or try to focus on everything that's going to be in the handbook first. At least look at.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Offer that as a suggestion.
The other policies that aren't in the 500, 5,000 series that do show up in the handbook. I mean, there's probably just a handful of those anyway.
And maybe when you're doing that evaluation with your team, you could you could at least look at how many other policies that would impact the handbook that we haven't looked at, that aren't in that series. And you could just kind of do a review of that. Your team could just look and just see, is it 10 additional policies? Is it 5 that are in another series but that impact the handbook?
Yeah, and Chair Lawford-Kemp, what you just alluded to too was that there's probably some in the handbook that may have been reviewed in 2020 or that aren't on the list that we have here.
Might be time.
So maybe they are priority.
And I think if we all agree that we're going to take the time that's needed to do it well, like we talked about trying to do a section every other month, which there's no way you can do the 500, 5,000 section in a month or two, right? So I think if we know that it might take 6 months, we'll do the ones that are needed for the handbook, but if we try and focus on getting one segment done and then move into the next, would that be agreeable?
What are your thoughts, executive assistant? Okay, because you do a lot related to the management of policy.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, and then I can look at the student handbook and see if there's any other.
And I need to hurry and replace my executive assistant, who is the one who actually, helps move the handbook along. So that's something I'm being thoughtful about. Not only that, and that's not the only reason, but there's capacity. We have a lot of things going on, and so I agree. I think Paul's suggestion of, and I think I was sharing that. Let's look at the ones that are connected to the handbook.
Yeah.
And you're right. Things to point out. There are some that are not connected to the 500 series.
Yeah.
So I was referring to those as well in terms of just
okay.
anything related to the student handbook, that we look at those first.
Just glancing at the revised dates on them, I see it 2014 and 2017 and 2016, so how far back is problematic? Or is it more of just, does it need to be updated or looked at, whether it's 2014, 16, or 17?
Well, yes, it needs to be looked at, but, we would have changed it if there were some state statute changes, or, that would have come up.
And don't forget, because I'm looking at one now, student fundraising. So if we get into some of these policies, it's going to open the door for lots of conversations that will involve connecting with the schools and potentially different other stakeholders, including our students and so forth. So there will need some opportunities for those conversations to happen. So I guess as I go back to my team, we will prioritize the handbook or the policies connected to the handbook. We'll map out the ones that we'll bring and in which months we will bring them. And I'll offer that as a recommendation, I share those recommendations at the next policy meeting. And during the next policy meeting, we are bringing one anyway. We're bringing the gender inclusion policy in. And if there's one or two other ones that are easy to bring forward and doesn't require a lot of refinement, I'll have those as policies for first reads as well next time.
Go ahead.
And I was just gonna state, kind of in reference to the student fundraising and the student fundraising regulation, which were both passed at the same time, January of 2020. There was a lot of work that went into those changes and those updates. So we may or may not need that same amount, because a lot of conversation happened with the schools on that, so.
Realizing that almost all of this falls on teaching and learning rather than the operational side of the house, we could potentially consider picking a different area like the 700 series, so that we're, Simone and Teresa can work on occasionally bringing forward a non-instructional operations policy. Well, we're just kind of picking away at the two different categories and getting them both done. That would be an option too.
I have a handful of HR ones that I would like to bring forward at some point as well.
That's a good idea. That way, if staff need a little bit more time to review a certain policy, we could review some HR.
And I think we want to go into this with, at any point, there could be different policies in other series that make sense to bring forward because of staff recommendation, and we want to have that flexibility in our thinking as we move forward. John.
I was thankful looking at it. So many have the date of 2019, but that's when they were uploaded, not necessarily when they've been revised.
Well,
But there's
some
a lot
of those, some of those that were revised in 2014, 2016, 2017, they may be fine.
Yeah,
It's just-
Right.
yeah.
Whereas
They
if
may.
not,
They might be fun.
and
I would think many of them would be just. Why not? Okay, so that kind of gives us a framework for the next, from now until July. Do we want to think through the rest of the year, or do we just kind of get through July and kind of review where we're at and then come up with the next plan?
I think that could be good, and like you said, a lot of the new legislation is coming forward at that point, so maybe in July, we're looking at what new legislation affects our policies, and then we can, maybe if we try and be done with most of the student policies by then we could pick another segment to try. It feels from past practice here and other places, it feels like we end up with a few policies here, a few policies there, and it's hard to see where are we necessarily taking care of a whole segment. And I think this would give us a focused way of doing that.
wasn't there something that we had to kind of speed through last summer to get the handbook out on time?
Yeah.
And we don't want to have that happen again, so.
And that
I can't
was,
remember
it
which
was
policy
actually, it was actually because the state had legalized medical
Yeah.
THC edibles, and then also there was a change in the data practices by the legislation. So it was just like, we said, here's new law, make sure it's in place. So all districts had to kind of scramble at the end and make sure those policies. Some districts didn't put policy in place and they just relied on statute, but I think it's better to have it in policy too if we can.
And there will be the case, probably like there was with our experience this past year, where there might be some policies that only need one reading as well, and they don't need two readings, so.
Right.
So Chair Lundberg, I'm sorry. So if we're not changing anything, does it go through this process of one reading? Or do we just review it and recognize, or does it not come to us, I guess that.
It does have to come to us, and
Even if we're not changing it?
We put a new date stamp.
Okay.
yeah, we put, and then I think, it is that public dialogue that,
All right.
and the reason why, where we need to do two readings, it gives the public an opportunity in between to learn or respond. So there's that piece of it.
Correct, and that's what would happen. It would be simply, especially if it's one that doesn't require any changes, but a new date, we would just simply update it. It'd be an expectation, obviously, that, board members have had a chance to read it, community has had a chance to come and share or, discuss it if they would like at the actual board meeting for a second reading. But
Yeah.
So it is a way of documenting that this has
Yeah.
been reviewed, and we can put the date stamp on it and then move on.
Get rid of the messy 1,000 series, right?
Yes, get rid of, well, we had so many policies, and we weren't the only district that had all these,
I think
6 policies for one policy. Yeah, but we,
next week, as we go to that MSBA conference too, I think many boards have wrestled with how do we process a whole body of policies, and if there are other ideas that come up as far as different ways of addressing it or more efficient ways, I'm totally fine with that. I just figured that might be a good way for us to chew on the same thing for a little bit.
no, I haven't looked at all the workshops, but there may be one just related to policies. I'm not sure. I know I went to one early in my time on the board, but so, as you're having conversations with people from other school districts, that's always good. Okay, any other thoughts? Jen? Okay. So is that clear enough direction, Patty and John and Anthony? Okay. Thank you for updating the adoption policies, or what we've adopted and all of that. Thank you for bringing that up today. Okay. Then I think that we can adjourn and have a little time, a few minutes before our next meeting at 4:30.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Or did you want